The most radical and fascinating rock band in modern music history. The book is called Present Tense, a Radiohead Compendium. Fill us in the desire to change and shapeshift. The Oxfordshire quintet has, through the 9 studio albums from Pablo Honey in 93 to 2016's Moon-Shaped Pool, constantly stretched the boundaries of what rock means and does. Here to explain a little more about the enigma that is Radiohead is Barney Hoskyns, author of Present Tense. Barney, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
Good to have you with us. They are a band, and I know you think that's about most bands, but they are a band who really do sort of defy labels, don't they?
Well, I think that's what they've set out to do, and done very well. You know, they didn't want to get straight-jacketed or put into any kind of box or any genre, and they just didn't want to be another rock band. They wanted to do different and brave and unusual things with what, you know, most of us understand as rock and roll.
So, excuse me, how did they all meet? Where did the quintet call? I mean, everybody knows about Thom, but explain a little bit about the other members of the group.
Well, they all essentially went to school together, so they were pals from, you know, very early on, adolescents, teenagers, and Jonny was a little bit younger. He was still in school when Radiohead got a record deal. But they're all from, you know, the Abingdon area, just outside Oxford. Good middle-class boys. And,
you know, good middle-class boys. It's not normally sort of the fervent breeding ground for rock god status. When did they first realise that there was sort of something going on and they were going to become one of the biggest bands in the world?
I think it took a little while. I think they took some time to really find out what they wanted to do. It was a difficult time to emerge as a British rock band. You know, they weren't part of the Britpop scene. They were sort of coming out of the kind of tail end of grunge. And initially, I mean, they weren't regarded, you know, terribly well in the music press. I don't think reviewers got them or understood what they were trying to do. And maybe no one really understood what they were trying to do or heard what they were trying to do till the second album, The Bends. I mean, I think you listen back to the first album, it's much more ordinary than anything they did after that. And they might have just disappeared, evaporated into just another British band from that time.
But if you think about it, I mean, if you think about the way the music press at that time, say mid-90s, it was Oasis and Blur, it was us versus them, it was Manchester v London, and it was a bit sort of, you know, a bit playground, wasn't it, really? And they were doing something which perhaps owes a little more to, and I tread very carefully here, Barney, it has more to do with maybe sort of prog rock albums and like late period Genesis type almost, and I can hear you gnashing your teeth at the other end of the phone, but anyway.
Well, no, you can't, because I'm not gnashing my teeth, but others would, I'm sure, at the mention of Genesis or a band like that. And I doubtless Radiohead would gnash their teeth. I don't think they would claim Genesis as an influence. But whether you use the P word, the prog word, or not, there's no doubt that they were prepared to risk being seen as pretentious in a way that, like, certainly Oasis weren't. You know, they were the opposite of Oasis, and they put quite a lot of thought and craft and, you know, dare one say it, virtuosity into their music, and there were all these different time signatures. You know, there were proggy elements. I mean, Paranoid Android, which is one of their most famous tracks, you know, really is prog rock kind of repurposed for the 90s.
So, and also, I mean, if you think about the way that they approach their lyrics as well, I mean, you think about, you know, Oasis is saying, you know, champagne supernova, Blur is saying lives in a very big house in the country. We're in the middle as well of that whole new lad culture, Loaded magazine, all, you know, Euro 96 and the whole bit. And there are these sort of quiet introspective guys from Oxfordshire. I mean, they didn't fit very well into that sort of the mainstream time period, did it?
No, and I mean, Thom Yorke, the front man, the singer, the primary lyricist, certainly didn't want to be a Liam Gallagher or a Damon Albarn. He just wasn't comfortable in that realm, and I don't think he's ever been comfortable as a sort of rock superstar. And a lot of what he's done musically and in terms of how they've shaped their career and relates to the media has been about sort of just deconstructing that whole idea of superstardom, not playing up to those cliches, not doing it like bands had done before, and they've increasingly backed away from the spotlight. They do very few interviews. They don't release records very often. They release records in unusual ways. They deliver them differently. They clearly didn't set out to be to be a band like Oasis, lapping up all the attention and all the trappings that come with that. They're just not interested. They're thoughtful. They're intelligent. They're a bit angst-ridden, and I think history will judge them as a group that went beyond the sort of obvious kind of gimmicks and the obvious riffs and so forth that bands like Oasis and even Blur did, really.
I mean, you yourself described them as having a seriousness, an emotional grandeur, and a willingness to stare humanity's dystopian high-tech future in the face. I mean, I love it. It's a sweeping statement and a half, but these are the issues they were dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly weren't singing about champagne supernovas or country houses or park life or any of that quite sort of pedestrian kind of English lyricism. I mean, they were really obsessed with computers and technology and politics, increasingly, the dystopian elements in our society. I mean, their music really prefigured, to some degree, the world we're in now. I think they were ahead of the curve. And they also just happened to make, breathtakingly beautiful music, I think. And so they managed to kind of, say really interesting things about the world we live in. But also, the music just stands up as, it's kind of breathtakingly beautiful, I think, a lot of it. I mean, it just melodically, it towers over the music of their contemporaries for the most part.
I mean, if you think about the themes and the issues they deal with in sort of Paranoid Android and OK Radio, I mean, here we are sort of 20-something years or 25-something years later, and a lot of these issues have come to fruition. Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. And I think when they started getting increasingly interested in electronic music, that jump from OK Computer to Kid A and a lot of the use they've made of electronica, of synthesizers, drum machines, that alienated some fans, but it excited a lot of people who were getting into techno and electronica, and I thought it was a really interesting adaptation. So they used that kind of style of music, that much more futuristic or at least much more contemporary sound to sing about, to write and sing about a world that was, increasingly technologized, computerized, and alienating. And Thom Yorke, I think, is particularly preoccupied with that. I think he is a rather tortured soul. He's not someone who's happy-go-lucky. I mean, everything is a problem for Tom, I think, and he gets mocked for that, Mr. Angst and so forth. But, I mean, A, he is one of the great British singers. B, I think his lyrics are really interesting because they're not obvious. They're not the usual kind of cliched, rhyming couplets. I mean, there's a lot of Yeah, he just writes in a really unusual way that I think captures the sense that a lot of us have living in the world now, where we're just sort of bombarded with data and information, and everyone's a bit kind of confused and alienated.
And this is a compendium, so where do you decide to draw the information here? Because it's a mixture, isn't it? It's a mezcla, as we say, of, you know, early reviews, and then you've got people like Will Self, who was very much the journalist, the writer of maybe the mid-90s onwards. So where do you pick and choose to put this together?
Well, we picked them from Rock's Backpages. This is a Rock's Backpages anthology. Rock's Backpages is the digital library of interviews and reviews that I co-founded about 20 years ago. So we have many thousands of articles on there, and we picked some of the best of the Radiohead pieces that we have. I suppose there's a handful of pieces that aren't on Rock's Backpages by writers that we don't have on the site. The very early things that you'll see in the book are by this guy Ronan Munro, who was the first person to write about Radiohead before they were even called Radiohead, when they were known as On a Friday. So there's these three really interesting little pieces about On a Friday playing in Oxford, you know, in their part of the country, and but he really does sort of he gets what makes them special, and definitely kind of puts a bet on them making it.
And it must be interesting to sort of read those early articles, because obviously with hindsight we know what happened next, but obviously at the time there was no idea that they were going to become the world-conquering band that they did.
No, and of course, you know, there were lots of bands, and there always are lots of bands being written about in the present tense, where writers are saying, this is going to be the next huge band or the next big thing, you know. And what, you know, like 99 out of 100 times it's not true. In this case, it was true. And I think that although they were initially regarded with suspicion, and I think partly because they were middle class, reviewers and interviewers couldn't quite make up their mind about Radiohead. They couldn't pigeonhole them. They didn't know where they fit in. They didn't fit in with, you know, Oasis or Blur or Suede or the Britpop bands. Maybe they had a little bit in common with, say, Supergrass or something like that, but they were out there on their own. I think when the Bends came out, even the most cynical journalist could hear the power and the sort of grandeur of the music on that record, and that's when you start to, you know, when you start to read pieces that are taking them seriously and really waking up to the fact that this is, you know, this is an unusually important and interesting group coming through. So there's like pieces by, you know, writers like Simon Price, who became, you know, a big writer on The Independent, and Tom Doyle and Q. Nick Kent, the legendary Nick Kent, reviewed OK Computer. You know, once Nick Kent had given his blessing to something, you know, for an older generation, that really meant something. And then there's great writers like Simon Reynolds, you know, who had a lot to do with making the case for Radiohead. I mean, for myself, I think OK Computer was the real. I mean, I put that on and I thought, I mean, this is as important and as great as, you know, Revolver by the Beatles or Dark Side of the Moon. Or, I mean, this is an event. This isn't just an album. This is an event from start to finish. This is like an extraordinary piece of work.
And obviously, when you come to put together this compendium, there must be great joy in going back through all the material that you have there. I mean, there is a large amount of material that you have to sift through, but, you know, reappraising the work, reappraising what makes them so good.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I put this together and I was really intrigued to read about how they were written back then. I mean, I didn't read everything that was written about Radiohead in the 90s, so it was just interesting to hear how people were viewing them and what kind of sense they were making of Radiohead's music. And I really like, there's a long just Q&A with Thom and Jonny Greenwood done in San Francisco by a writer for one of the early like online music magazines called Addicted to Noise, and that might have been the first time Radiohead did a sort of an interview like for an online, magazine, if you like, a website, and that goes back to 96. It's like the Stone Age for the internet. But they're talking about the internet even then. They were very quick onto that. They had their own website very early on because they were just interested. They weren't Luddites in any way. They really embraced technology and electronics.
And I suppose the other thing is the fact that because they don't flood social media, they don't Snapchat, you don't get, this makes something like present tense, it makes it more valuable because you understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I love the fact, personally, I really respect the fact that they don't spread themselves thin, they don't talk to everybody, they're not out there, not tweeting, they're not, they kind of keep themselves to themselves. I think they understand the value of, of spending time on their work. They don't rush into anything. They don't need to be, to be out there. They don't crave fame, and I think that. Some people would say, well, that's kind of pompous and overly serious, and they're kind of, this is art rock at its most pretentious. I understand that, and I think some of this stuff is a bit pretentious. There's something sometimes a little bit irritating about Thom Yorke. I can't deny it. I happen to think that Jonny Greenwood is... has really proved himself to be some kind of a musical genius, because I think without Jonny, maybe Radiohead isn't quite the force that it is. He brings something really special musically to the table, I think, and that's been proved by the soundtrack work he's done for directors like Paul Thomas Anderson. He's become one of the most respected soundtrack musicians in the world now, and it's always interesting to hear what he has to offer. I mean, the last album they did, Moon-Shaped Pool, I thought there was wonderful stuff on that. I think some people thought it was a bit of a kind of just a collection of sort of odds and sods and stuff that had been lying around. But I think it really holds together as one of their best records, actually. And it's a lot to do with what with what Jonny is doing. Just his string arrangements. He's still one of the great British guitar players for sure. He's a really special guy. That combination, ultimately, I think, of Thom and Jonny is the key to Radiohead.
Some people may not be familiar with all their works. If you were to say to somebody, okay, here's a crash course, here's Radiohead 101, maybe pick sort of 3 or 4 pieces that could get them familiar with what Radiohead mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say, look, listen to OK Computer, just put it on and listen to it from start to finish, because there isn't really a kind of a weak moment in it. It doesn't sort of sag anywhere, whether it's kind of high octane sort of velocity, or whether it's kind of really kind of beautiful things like Karma Police. I mean, it really does. It's one of those rare records these days that takes you on a kind of journey. I would say there are, fabulous songs on, like Hail to the Thief, I think is a really strong record, like 2 + 2 = 5, the opening track on that is very much the kind of best of Radiohead. It's incredibly powerful, but sort of melodically really beautiful as well. I like tracks on all their records. I think OK Computer is still their greatest album. I think, if you listen to the most recent record I was just talking about, Moon-Shaped Pool, the first track, the lead track on that, Burn the Witch, is pretty extraordinary.
I've got a WhatsApp coming in and say Creep, one of the best songs ever.
Well, yeah, we haven't mentioned Creep, and that was the song that really put them on the map.
Yeah.
It's not one of my favorites, but I understood why it got so much attention. It was sort of like a British version of grunge. There was all the sort of angst and self-loathing that you got from Kurt Cobain, but in a kind of British indie rock form, and it was quite startling to hear someone sort of singing from a place of such self-loathing, and that was, that was quite Cobain-esque. Fortunately, Thom Yorke is still alive, and I don't think ultimately he was as damaged or is as damaged as Kurt Cobain was. So, he's still around, and he's a dad, and he's matured into as a functioning adult human being.
Mm. The book is called Present Tense: A Radiohead Compendium. It's out. It's out now. It's out. No, so yes,
it is. It's out today.
It's out today. Exactly.
I think it is. The paperback publication day is this very day.
Marvelous. If people want to find out, more about it or about you, of course, you mentioned the website. So go ahead, Barney. Give it a quick plug.
Yeah. Okay. So it's Rock's Backpages, the online library of music writing.
The book is called Present Tense: A Radiohead Compendium. It's by Barney Hoskyns. Barney, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Treat to speak with you. Thank you so much.